really thrilled today to welcome Susan DeCaro to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here. Let me tell you a little bit about Sue DeCaro. Sue is a worldwide speaker, coach, and educator. She is the host of the wonderful podcast, Conscious Parenting, Thriving Kids. On her website, she has a beautiful line that I think really describes her heart and her mission. Those that work with Susan learn how to truly tap into their heart, know who they are, live authentically as they bring their values and desires to life. Sue shares that the internal space inside us all is the space we first need to connect with in order to connect with anyone around us. I love that. Thank you so much for being here, Sue.
Oh, it's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad. And we were just talking before that you're so comfortable with sharing your story. So I'm really excited for you to be here so we can share your story, and people who are going through a divorce do not have to feel so alone.
Absolutely. Right? We don't want anybody to feel alone.
No, that's why I created this, so that people going through divorce can know other people's stories. So I always like to start with the same question for all my guests, which is, what's the one word you would use to describe your divorce?
Eye-opening. It's 2 words.
Perfect.
But, you know, at this point in my journey, I can look back and say it was eye-opening.
Love that. Beautiful.
If it was yesterday, I would have had a different language around it. But
Yeah. But that's one of the things I love to bring up in this podcast, is that we are able over time to see the experience as both having been a struggle and a healing process. So I can't wait to hear more about why it was eye-opening. So I like to start and ask people just a little bit about kind of, when did you hear that little voice that goes through our minds of separation might be possible? Like, when did you start? Because very often, I think people think that you get divorced pretty quickly, but often for many of us, there's that little sound.
Mm-hmm. So 5 years before we separated, the sound began, and actually my ex-husband, he moved out. And I remember, he just said, I think we need to part. And so it kind of came as a surprise, but perhaps not. It wasn't that I heard the voices or that we were fighting all the time saying, why are we together, kind of thing. And then we were able to work with a therapist and bring ourselves back together. And I remember he wanted to move back in after a few days. He was living with his parents, and maybe that's why. And I said, no, that's not going to happen, because, you moved out and you can't just change your mind. I'm not like a yo-yo.
Yeah.
And so we began working with a therapist. And so I will say, for a few years, we were able to work in a different way in our relationship. And then 5 years later, it was just, I could feel it, he could feel it. Not that that's easy. That doesn't make it easy. Just because this is not working, you can still fall apart feeling like, how will I ever move on?
Yeah.
So, I think that for me was the eye opener, is that I was able to move on, and I learned so much about myself. But I think that when we put it in perspective, and I have a client right now who's going through this, and we think about all the skills and strengths and things that we have within us that are there. They were there through the marriage. They might be there through the separation, and certainly the divorce. They're part of us. That's the internal strength that we carry everywhere. But it seems like times of struggles, divorce, and many other things in life cause us to separate from our own strength and ability to see ourselves in this beautiful way.
Yeah.
So,
and you bring up something really important, Sue, that for people who are listening who, had the person move out and then come back in and you worked on it, right? That's part of your process. It's not like if you end up getting divorced after that, somehow that therapy was a failure. That all of that was the process of getting you to where you are, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And for a while it was good, but then we slipped right back into the old habits and continued those old habits. And I remember at that time thinking, I don't know why you came back, but I don't necessarily believe that it's for me. And even saying, that you just didn't want to be away from the children.
Yeah.
So never really knowing what the case was. I still don't know, and that's okay. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter at this point. But there was, a lot of question in my mind about why are you back and why are you putting in the effort, especially since my ex didn't believe in therapy. And, we were all about the therapeutic process. Myself and
And
one of
their
my kids
kids.
was in therapy. Yeah. So,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
So I think you're pointing out also that there can be this experience of someone behaving in a certain way that makes you, that looks like they're in, but you can also tune into a feeling of, oh, I don't know why they're here. I mean, I think that when you're in a relationship and you're asking yourself, why are you here to the other person, right? That's a sign that it's probably not working for you, because no one should have to be with someone who you're wondering why they're there.
Absolutely. And I think when I put it all together and kind of looked back at the leaving and the wanting to come back so quickly, I really felt like it was for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And, my marriage wasn't based on just for the kids. I wanted a marriage that was based on love and connection separate from the children. So it was the belief system that was really hard for me to let go of. And whether I was getting an honest answer from him or not didn't matter. It was, what I believed to be true. And I didn't let that affect how I worked on the relationship. I still was committed to trying to work and make it the best relationship that I possibly could. But, when you see no end in sight, then you have to let go.
Right. And so in your relationship, were you the one who eventually let go, or was it him? Or
It was him. I had made a lot of comments like, we should just be divorced and nasty things like that. And, I'm not proud. I'm certainly not proud. But I think there was a lot of undercutting and sarcasm coming from me that really were honest remarks that I just didn't realize how connecting, they were to me and my feelings at that time. And so I guess he just got tired of hearing those words come out and, anger
right.
and frustration. And so he just decided that he was going to leave. So
I'm glad you bring this up, because I
yeah.
think it's not uncommon. I think what you're talking about is not uncommon. And I'm wondering, Sue, if maybe, and other women and men can relate to this, you didn't feel the agency either in your relationship or in your own body being to say what you wanted. So you said it off the cuff. A lot of people in my practice will say, I didn't want to say it so meanly, so I said it this way, in a way that is, as you're saying, ends up being so much
Sarcasm.
meaner.
Yeah. Well, and I think, talking about the strength within, I don't think at that time, actually, I know at that time that I did not feel I had the strength or capability to move through this. I was scared.
Yeah.
I didn't have courage. I was not brave, none of those things. So, this was my way to say, oh, this is awful. I can't stand him, or, things like that, but with a different language, but not have the courage to take the step to say, this isn't working for me. We need to end this relationship.
Yeah.
I don't know, looking back, if I would have ever said that. And at the same time, I would not be the person that I am today had that not been said.
Right.
So, it takes courage for me to say, hey, I wasn't the one to leave, but in the end, it was the best for both of us.
And I want to point out, I say this to a lot of the women I work with, that it also takes courage to accept when someone says they're leaving. Because when you've been in this dance for 5 years, I'm sure there was something you could have said, something you could have done to reel him back in, right? We have these dance moves that we do. But there was a moment where you accepted it. And I just want to say to people who are going through this, that is a moment, really.
It wasn't that moment. I said, get your bags and get out. It wasn't that moment. And there was a lot of anger at that point, but it did come, to me at some point in time where, I was like, this is really the best for everyone, including the kids.
Yeah.
Because I don't think kids thrive in an environment where love is conflict. Love is conflict. And, we may have loved each other in a new way, not the way we originally started out, but it was filled with conflict and chaos, and it wasn't helpful for anyone. And it wasn't helpful for our physical well-beings either one of us.
How do you think you got from that place of get out anger to acceptance? What were some of the healing you did? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
So for those of you who can relate, I cried a lot. And again, I think we need to own the process of how we move through this with courage. And, I was a mess.
Mm.
And so for days, I, had one friend that I would call constantly all day long. I'm sure she was tired of hearing from me, but she was very helpful and supportive. And I saw a therapist. And the one day I think that was the turning point that I will never forget is my therapist said to me, "What will you miss? What are you actually missing of him not being there?" And I remember sitting there thinking and thinking, what am I missing? What am I missing? What was I actually receiving from this relationship? And all of a sudden I said, I don't have a handyman. And
Wow.
I realized, gosh, that's all I was getting from the relationship. And that was the turning point, that this relationship wasn't serving me. I had a handyman in the house.
Yeah.
So at that point, probably that same day, I went out and bought a nice woman's toolkit. And guess what? I became the handy woman. And that door closed in
Mm.
terms of seeing it clearer and being able to understand that this relationship didn't serve me at that time in
Mm.
any way.
Oh,
And so,
what a powerful question. I love that. I have a part of my program where we talk about when the answer to that question is like what I thought my life was going to be, right? That we have to release a lot of beliefs about ourselves and what our future was. And so sometimes you get a concrete answer like a handyman, and wait a minute, am I staying in this for this? Or there's a more kind of emotional or cognitive answer that you get.
mhm.
But I promise you, whatever that answer is, you can work with it, right? Like you said, okay, I'm going to go get my own toolbox.
Yeah, it was a beautiful aha moment. And honestly, I can still, as I'm saying this, I can feel myself
Oh,
in
you're
the room and, with her, and what an amazing moment that was for me to realize, all I really had, and nothing against him. I mean, we actually
sure.
have a friendly relationship at this point, but in our relationship at that moment, that was all that really was serving me, was that those handyman skills. And I felt as if when we were together, he traveled a lot. So I felt when he was there, I was lonely.
Mm,
And when he was not there, I was alone.
yeah.
And so, to be lonely with someone else is not a good feeling
Right.
on a day-to-day basis, every single day together.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit from your experience and the work that you do? What do you think being in that loneliness when you're with someone but you're feeling lonely, like what do you think that does to our heart and our mind and our body?
I think it can make us cold.
Mm,
It can really make us feel as if we're not worthy. I mean, there's a lot of
mhm,
things. We can bring up old limiting beliefs that we maybe connected with in childhood.
mhm.
Um, it can make us question, our love energy, who we are as a person.
Yeah.
But it can also help us to question relationships.
Mm,
And, I think that as we gain our strength back or see ourselves in a stronger way as we move forward, it can make us look at that loneliness as, this is not the right relationship for me,
mhm.
because it doesn't fill my heart and soul. It's worse to be with this person than it is to be alone in my own company.
Right.
And so, I used to think, wow, alone, that's not so bad. And I had never been alone. So I
Mhm.
always had a roommate, and then, got married, out of my household home as a child.
Yeah.
So I think that you realize that you are your own best company as you continue to grow through the emotions that come through
Yes.
divorcing.
I think that's a great point. I think that's one of the pieces that we don't get to do, some of us don't get to do early on in our lives, really realize that we are the ones we rely on, not our roommate, not our parents, not our partner. And there is kind of a forced, especially if you have children, because if you're sharing custody, this forced moment of being with yourself. And
Mhm.
so I'm wondering, what was that like for you the first time? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, yes, I remember distinctly. And again, I can see these images. I
Yeah.
really need to imagine these things as I talk about them.
Yeah.
I can remember them walking out the door the very first time and falling apart,
Mm,
thinking, how do people do this? Because I felt as if my life was my children. And I'm not really sure that's true, but that's what it felt like in that
mhm,
moment.
mhm.
And that, now what? What do I do with myself?
Yeah.
And you have a whole weekend that seems like an endless amount of time without children around, no noise, nobody put to bed, nobody to feed, nobody to bathe, nobody to,
Right.
read to, talk with, argue with, perhaps.
Right.
So it was a very daunting, feeling, and a very difficult weekend. I remember reaching out to a friend of mine who was divorced and saying, I don't know what to do with myself. And she said to me, you need to start getting your own life together and creating opportunities and things for yourself to do, to be busy and enjoy your life. Like, for example, go out for dinner with, your women friends, or, any friends that you have, women, men, doesn't matter. And really start to, when your kids aren't there, to create a structure for yourself, so that you're not just sitting alone all day long, crying it out, saying, when are my kids coming back? Is it Sunday at 5? So I began to do that. She was a very wise person, and her advice was amazing.
Yeah.
And so that helped a lot.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the process, Sue, of getting to know yourself and becoming your best ally, because in those moments you really have to ask, like, what do I want to eat? Or where do I want to go? Like, no one, especially when you're a parent, like, I don't have to go anywhere for anyone. What do I want? And that's a real moment, I think, of opportunity and also discomfort, which is, any sort of big moment has both.
Right. But to move through the discomfort, to learn more, is where the growth occurs. And
how'd you do that? Tell me about your process of learning and moving through your grief and your experience.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was a lot of tears and a lot of, frustration and upset. And this brilliant friend that I mentioned, she said to me, it's all about, I'll never forget it. And I use her language because I think was brilliant for me, and hopefully it helps other people. It's all about the kids now. And just those simple words, which meant that my anger needed to be put aside, my frustration with him needed to be put aside, my whatever feelings I had, the blame, it didn't matter. We all have many, many feelings that come through us as we're going through this. And she said, you need to think about the kids now, because you will always be connected with this person for your children. And my kids are in their 20s now. And yes, I'm still connected with this person.
Right.
And so it's never ending, as they get older, their graduations, their weddings, their soccer games, whatever it is, you're still connected in some way. And you want to be able to be in the same room for the sake of your children.
Right.
To have that friendly or, camaraderie to support your kids. So, it was a process of learning about myself, learning about my strength, which again, I didn't think I had the strength to get through it. And I can remember saying, I'll never get through this. I'll never get past this, thinking, I'm just going to fall apart right here.
Yeah. Yes.
And yet it was one of the most eye-opening experiences in knowing and learning that, okay, I can be a handy woman. I have those skills, and I can be my own best friend and my own best company. I have those skills too, to, be with myself and learn and love who I am and how I show up in the world.
Right.
And so there was a lot of those types of ahas that this will be okay, and I can survive through this and thrive even through it. But again, it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And for anybody listening, it's not simple.
Yeah.
There were, months maybe of tears.
Yeah.
Or maybe a month.
I like what you said, Sue, also for those people listening who might have a struggle, making themselves a priority and focusing on themselves. You can kind of trick yourself that this is about the kids. So do this for the kids. Heal yourself. I have a masterclass that I teach about how to heal yourself so that you can help your kids get through the divorce. So even if you think your life will never get better, the more you try to heal and move through this and release, the better it is for the kids. We talked about that on your podcast. And so it's such a great reminder, because I do think, at least I know when I was in the depths of it, I wasn't going to do anything good for myself. I wasn't my biggest fan. I was too overwhelmed by grief. But if it was for my kids, I could show up and do a bit.
Yeah. And so I think you have to go with what's working for you in those moments, and look at what isn't. So if you're not able to show up for yourself, take a bit of time so that you can process what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Because those feelings aren't going to go away.
Exactly. They go out sideways. We know
that. Right. That's right. That's right. And you think you're showing up with this beautiful light and energy for your children, and they're wondering, what the heck's wrong with mom?
Exactly.
And I think we Well, I know we are the models for our children in good times and bad times. I don't even like to use those words good and bad, but with the challenges and struggles and the everyday, feelings of success and
Mm-hmm.
glory, whatever the celebration might be,
Mm-hmm.
those times are the times that our children are watching to
Yeah.
see how we navigate. And when you navigate honoring your feelings in a way that serves you, you're teaching your children that it's okay to be sad. It's okay to move through those emotions. And I really wholeheartedly believe in emotional intelligence for us as adults, and especially as the models for our children,
Yeah.
because stuffing how you feel is not going to help you, nor is it going to help your children, nor will it help your physical body and being,
Right.
or your mental state. But these emotions come out in physical ways too. I mean, I've had that happen, through my own experiences too, in my own
Right.
journey. So
I'm thinking that actually divorce is like graduate school for emotional intelligence, right? It throws you into a place of either you're going to figure out how you feel and work on it and be with it, or you're going to completely disown it. But I guess that is really the choice. One little molecule at a time, as we talk about, very
yeah.
slowly. So what piece of advice, if you could go back to that woman who was, before therapy, when the first time he moved out to his parents, what little advice would you give her, knowing you now? What would you tell her?
You are brave, you are strong, you are
Mhm.
courageous, and you'll see that as you continue on. Yeah, I mean, I think the I can't do it is what kicked in. And I would now know that I can do it. Not only that, but anything. So we are a lot more courageous and able than we think we are, that we give ourselves credit for. And so the belief that this too shall heal, this too shall pass, and we will survive and thrive at some point.
Oh, I love that. And so many of the women I've interviewed have said the same thing. Courage, that you're brave. The women in my program, I refer to them as super women because I think it is one of the bravest things to accept or choose divorce. And so I love that message, and you are so not alone. And I think that in general, this idea of not feeling brave enough to handle hard things goes back to what you were saying, is that when we model perfectly and perfectly handling hard things, our kids see that. We feel more prepared when other life experiences happen to us.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah. But many of us didn't learn this as children because it wasn't modeled for us way back when. We do what we can with what we know, right? The more we know, the more we can do. And so, my parents didn't teach us emotional intelligence in any way because they weren't familiar with it either.
Yeah.
So I think, we now know so much more, and it's so important to allow those emotions to flow through you in a way that you can process. And I mean, obviously we don't want to lay in bed and cry all day long while our kids are, trying to navigate their own lives, because that wouldn't be the best way either. But also, I think calling on help and support as you move through, so your children see that we don't have to navigate life by ourselves. We can actually call friends and have a support system to help us to move through our emotions and feelings and our needs to show up in the world in a better way as we move on.
Well, it's so poignant to hear you, quote friends. And as those are the moments, your aha moments, the women in my program who support each other, it's the moments that they say, the things they say to each other. Even as a clinical psychologist, it's not necessarily the things I say, it's what other peers who are going through it, who've been through it, say. And it's such a good reminder, thank you, Sue, of getting support and reaching out and being vulnerable. And I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable here and share your story.
Anything I can do to help. We're all in this together. We're all in life together. And to have a tribe that understands and gets what you're going through is crucial, because those that don't aren't those people you want to turn to in times of divorce.
Exactly.
They're afraid that divorce is going to be in their water next.
It's contagious.
They're like,
exactly. Exactly. You need the right tribe. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else, Sue, that you'd like to say around the topic of divorce, or make sure our audience knows, given your experience before we?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd love to leave people with is be gentle with yourself, because, and compassionate, because it's not easy. And what I've shared, it may sound like I just moved through it easy with a box of Kleenex, and that's not really true. It was a few boxes.
Yeah.
But, you have to bring self-compassion home, because it's a tough time, and we need to be gentle with ourselves as we move through it.
Yeah.
So don't expect yourself to turn over on a dime and be the perfect human being that we expect to be, because we're not perfect, we're imperfect, and that's something to celebrate too. So gentleness and compassion.
Oh, what a perfect place to stop. Thank you so much, Sue. And can you just share a little bit about how people can find you best, your podcast?
Sure. My podcast, Conscious Parents, Thriving Kids, where we talk about all sorts of fun things. And also on my website, which is SueDeCaro.com, and Facebook, SueDeCaro.com, Instagram, SueDeCaro.com. You can see the theme here.
Yeah.
So just my name is where you find me.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and sharing
pleasure.
your experience. I'm really
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.